Hello there, Zoe here. Welcome back to the show. My question for you this week is, do your teams self-manage? And how much are you doing to support them to do so? Let's find out. On planet Human, the Chinese have a two-way brain-computer interface being developed. Now, I'm obsessed with BCIs, and this marks a huge leap forward in the technology, because what it means is that the human brain tissue can interact with the brain chip of the computer interface in a two-way street, meaning that the brain can learn from prompts from the brain computer chip. Otherwise, it was one way, where the brain would put out signals and the computer chip would interpret it. This means that the brain can learn to respond to whatever feedback the chip gives it to help improve its direction. Now, the application the Chinese are using this because they don't use invasive technology, they use wearable technology for this. It can help do things like direct drones without using your hands. So you can use your brain to teach the chip to drive a drone. And if you get it wrong, the chip gives feedback to the brain about, oh, maybe you could have fired up this neuron in a different way. So this marks a huge new advancement in brain-computer interfaces that are non-invasive, two-way learning. Who knows what's coming next? On Planet Zoe this week, I am well into my training for the Australian Alpine walking track. I'm doing 2 more weeks with some friends on the track, and there is a lot of elevation. We're walking about 160 kilometers over 16 days, and that includes 6,000 meters of up. So that's 3/4 of the way up Mount Everest, if you like. So yes, I am out there walking with a 15-kilo pack, trying to get as many hills as possible under my belt to prepare my body for the shock to the system that is no doubt to come. But I'm so looking forward to that. I guess what else is happening on Planet Zoe is I am well into the production of Power Games. That's my next leadership book. And I've had a look at the first typesetting edition. The cover draft is finished. So the whole product is getting into production. I've been working on the audiobook as well, which is very painful. Having to read to myself and make it exciting as a listener is my objective, is quite tough, especially sitting in awkward positions in this room with all a bunch of padding around me to try and make the sound as good as I can. So that's all progressing. The Kickstarter campaign will launch in May. You can sign up for advance notice to make sure that you're first notified when it goes live, because there are a few bonuses and extras that are only going to be limited. So you want to make sure that you're there. And the link is in the show notes. You can just pop on there and you can get advance notice of the launch. Or you can go to my website, zoerath.com, click on books, and you find Power Games right there. You can sign up there. Can't wait to share all the juicy details. It's coming soon and it's coming fast, and that's what's happening on Planet Zoe. What if power was talked about openly? How might we then share power? Of course, I've been obsessing about power since I've been writing this book and producing this book, Power Games, for some time now. And sharing power is something that leaders find very difficult because power is energizing. It feels really good to be in charge, to be able to make decisions, to execute orders, and to have people follow through on them. One aspect of sharing power is decision-making. And I think leaders find it very difficult to share decision-making. An example from this week is a CEO decided to change the motto of an organization unilaterally without consulting the board, without even asking the staff about, should we change the motto? She just did it unilaterally. Yep, I'm doing this. I mean, how much buy-in is she going to get with this? Not at all. This organization has a long 70-year history now, and to just change the motto like that on her own, it's pretty bad. So this is an example of moving towards becoming a tyrant. Yes, when we decide we know what we're doing, we're in charge, the organization is only thriving as a result of our own input. We then to think, all my decisions are great. I'm not going to bother consulting. I don't want anybody's pushback on this, and things go pear-shaped. So how can we learn to avoid being a tyrant? And the first starting place, or one of the starting places we can do it, is through sharing power through decision-making. Yes. So we want to be more consultative as opposed to dictatorial. How do we do that? First of all, identify what kind of decision-making process you're going to bring to which decisions. Will it be autocratic? Should it be autocratic? In some cases, yes. Sometimes the leader does have to be autocratic, but that's a very small margin in emergency situations only. Are you going to be democratic, where people vote on it? Are you going to be consultative? Are you going to be holacratic, which is you put the whole decision-making process through a very stringent process to get all challenges on the table, to work through all the issues to make a decision? So decide on your decision-making process first. Next, determine the scope of your decision-making, meaning what kinds of decisions can we make as a team, as a collective, and as individuals, and where does a hard stop finish or the gray line blur, so that we know how much jurisdiction we have over the decision. Example of the motto should not be left to one person. I think it affects too much of an organization which has a large stakeholder base. All right. And the third aspect of that is to review your decisions. Keep a decision-making journal. I think this is a really useful tip, and I wish I could remember where I got this tip from, is to document your decisions, the thinking that went into it, so that when you come to look back in your journal 3 months, 6 months later, you can say, did we do a good enough job testing our assumptions, role modeling the consequences? Was it a good, solid decision? How has it played out? That way we can learn to think better when we're making decisions and review what worked and what didn't. Okay, that's how we can share power and avoid being a tyrant. So in tea time in the office kitchen, my guest today is John Taylor McEntire. And he has had an extraordinary life, from an open door, welcoming home that saw all types of people come through his doors. He's been exposed to different types of people from an early age. He also sang in prisons at the age of 11. He ended up living in Japan for a long time. So he's had exposure to very different kinds of people and different kinds of communities. And this has led him to become a great consultant and the Chief Empowerment Officer at Mutual Property. And in this great conversation, we explore, how do we develop greater connection with people? How can we build teams that are self-empowered and self-managing without losing our sense of influence? Without further ado, he is John Taylor McEntire, all the way from Washington State, the desert area of the Evergreen State. Welcome to the show, John McIntyre.
Thank you so much, Zoe.
There is so much to have a conversation about your background to start off with. I was reading through your bio and was like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Not least of which is spending some time in Japan. I go to Japan every year for the last decade skiing, so I've got a little bit of dose of Japan. I'd love to explore that with you a little bit too. But tell me a little bit about the unusual upbringing that you had that has been a calling for you to do the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, there's really three components to this. We always had somebody new at the table, had foreign exchange students from Japan, Germany, Uruguay, you name it, had humanitarian refugees, a family from Laos. 6 of them came during the Laotian Civil War, and they lived with us for 6 months, and we had to get them set up. We had Navajo foster brothers that were with us for years, cousins, and a whole bunch of, there's always somebody new at the table.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about that before you move on to the next section of the story? Because I think that's highly unusual. At least it is in the environment in which I find myself now, people opening their doors to strangers. What was it about your family or your parents that directed, the door opening policy? How did they seek out being supportive? What was that like?
They're very giving people, my parents. They really cared about people. When I look back at it now, I think that really it was useful for my upbringing to bring me to where I'm at right now. It helped me understand that everybody is an equal here on Earth, and I talk about puzzle pieces. So everybody is a piece of the puzzle of life, and somehow we need to recognize that we need to fit in together and everything. So I didn't know that how we were living was unusual. But my father would just bring people home. He was a doctor, and sometimes there'd be somebody in the emergency room that he would just bring them home. They had a skiing accident. I grew up in Salt Lake City, so they had a skiing accident, and so he would, I don't know, he would just make people feel at ease, and then he was comfortable having people in the house and everything. And so for the most part it was all really good. There were times um when things went missing and stuff, but that was very, very rare. But for the most part it was just lovely to get to know people and to recognize that my view of the world is not really the only view of the world, that there's other views out there. And so that got me interested in actually traveling to understand where these people are coming from.
And you before we hit record, you said that you traveled to all 50 states in the US before the age of what, 22 or something crazy?
Yeah, yeah. Before 22, I had traveled all 50 states and also 19 countries.
Oh my
And
God.
so it's the places that I went all became very meaningful to me. And some of it was places where some of these people who stayed at our house were from. And so getting used to that and everything. There was a one man that stayed at our place. He was a foreign exchange student. My dad was a doctor, so he was there for medical training at the university in town. And he was from Japan, and his name was Tetsuro. And I actually, in my office, I have a painting that he had given my parents of some uh, just a Japanese painting. And anyway, I really think fondly of him. When he left, we thought his name was actually really interesting. We thought it sounded like Tootsie Roll. So remember those Tootsie Roll banks?
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. So I gave him a Tootsie Roll bank, but he knew that we were Christian, so he gave me a golden cross and everything when he came to see me in a play that I was in. So it was very, very nice. That's the type of relationships we had and everything. Along with actually having people in our home, my dad would play the piano and I would sing, and he took me a couple times to the prison. And so he was always just saying everybody's equal, we're just in this life together and we need to figure out how we help each other out.
Well, some people go to the beach and you went to prison on the weekend to sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that like?
Um, I think at first I was like kind of nervous and everything,
Yeah.
but I realized that these were people that had gotten in trouble, and I had been in trouble myself sometimes, not the same type of trouble, but just the fact that my dad took me helped me understand that he must have felt like we were safe to take me, but also felt that we had something to give them.
And was that your experience? You sang for them? Did you feel a sense of appreciation from the inmates?
Yeah, it was actually better than I thought it could be. Most of the time, it was like, yeah, there was a calm that was in the room and everything. That's actually another part of my life that I'll just go into really quickly. When I was 9 years old, my parents had somebody over for dinner on a Sunday afternoon, and we had just seen a play that person was in the night before at the playhouse in town. And I was laying on the couch while my mom and her were talking, and then she brought up the fact that there was going to be tryouts for The Sound of Music, and I had just been like inundated with all this stuff about how great the theater was, but I just knew that I was supposed to go to this tryout. So when she left, I told my parents that I'm supposed to go to this tryout, and they just kind of patted me on the head. Oh, that's nice, John. You've never sung in front of anybody before, and you don't even talk. So how could you get on stage? So they dismissed it for about a month. And then 2 days before, I just said, well, if you're not going to take me, I'm going to take the bus, which would have taken me to a really dangerous part of town. And so they took me. And then when I went in, I had the accompanist play Edelweiss, and out of this small body came this big booming voice. And the room that had hundreds of people that were like talking in the background, it just went completely silent. And I knew that that was one of my callings, was to actually help calm people down by using my music.
Oh my goodness. And your parents didn't know you had this big booming voice?
No, no. And so from 9 to 19, I was in over 30 productions, and did small bit parts in television, and some. I was a soloist in the boys' choir in town, and did some vocal recordings, and then also did some dramatic recordings. So I was really busy during that time in my life, along with having these guests in our home. But they would come to the plays that I was in and stuff,
Yeah.
and so it was very interesting to be able to share in that way.
Absolutely. Is that how you ended up doing work in Hollywood, or is that a different chapter later?
That's a different chapter later. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about that, or is that
Well,
a no-go zone?
well, when I was in when I so I after high school, I went to college for a semester, and then I decided to do some missionary work for my church for 2 years, and I ended up going to Japan.
Yeah.
And when I went to Japan, that's when I learned about studying language immersion wise. And so learned Japanese. And so I decided that I was going to change my major, which at the time was going to be in theater, okay, into Japanese and business. And what's interesting is that my dad had told me, he says, "What are you going to do for university?" And I said, "Well, I was thinking about theater." And he said, "Well, that's fine, John, and you can do that if you want, but you remember you've already done that for 10 years, of your life. Um, you know, think about all the people that you knew in the theater. How are most of them living?" And I said, "Well, hand to mouth." And he says, "Well, is that what you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I thought I did." And he says, "You can always have that be your avocation." But he goes, maybe thinking about something for your vocation would be important. And so that's why after I was in Japan, it was actually at the time when Japan's economy was just starting to spike. And so I decided to do Japanese with Asian studies, and then that made me actually study two other languages, Mandarin and Korean, and business. So then I went back to Japan into a company that did PR work, and I was there for a year. And then a person from my church in Japan had come to me and said, "Hey, I've got this company here that I've been running," and that was a consulting company. That's really what I wanted to do. And then he had another company that was failing at the time, and he needed to go work on that. And so he says, "I need you to keep my company afloat while I'm taking care of this other one." And that's where the Hollywood producers, we carried 134 Hollywood producers films, taking them into Japan
Oh, I see.
for VHS tapes, and for home use or business use and things like that. So that's where that,
Okay.
yeah.
So from a whole multicultural assortment of peoples in your house to doing performances to Japan to studying languages to business, you've created a pathway where you can start to weave understanding human connections into business acumen, which is where we are today, right?
Yes, yes, yep.
Tell me a little bit about how how you weave all of this into the work that you do now.
Um, so Uh, I was in Doha, Qatar for from 2013 until 2022, and then I continued with the Qatar Foundation for another year and a half after that, working from the States. And towards the end of that, during the COVID years, I had my wife had promised me 5 years, and we were already at 7 years at this time. And my wife and my daughter had moved back to Washington because there was a program called Running Start, which allowed her to take her high school junior and senior classes in the junior college, and she could get a degree with her diploma for high school. And so they came home, and I was thinking, well, I need to be changing something. And so I ended up starting to write a book on consensus building, which is really what I was doing in all my activities throughout the world, helping to build innovation ecosystems at universities or national labs or government organizations, trying to get the government, academic, and businesses groups to be working together. And so as I had this writing coach who ended up being Jack Canfield, and he's become a big mentor of mine. Just a little story. when the first time we met each other online, I'm from Doha and he's from his home in Santa Barbara, and on Zoom, and there's hundreds of people in this meeting, and he says, John Taylor McEntire. He goes, we have the same name, and I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, my name, I was born John Taylor Canfield, and so anyway, that there was a bond there, and I ended up going into his program to train the trainers to teach the success principles that he had.
Mhm.
And so I'm a success principles methodology coach. And so that kind of set the stage in regards to, what I was thinking about doing and everything. But the book that I was writing, which I'm still writing right now, is on consensus building. And what he told me at first was that's really interesting. Consensus building. This is back in 2021. He says consensus building. Can you actually write a whole book on that? And so as I looked into it, uh, it would be too academic if I was just to do it on that. So I ultimately, over the years, I put together a program called Sync, SYNC, and it's synchronize yourself naturally within your community. And basically, this is a component of all the different things that have happened throughout my life that help me understand how to put these big innovation ecosystems together. And the synchronized part, it really has that consensus building in it, but it's helping people learn how to speak the same language within their organization. So I help break the curse of Babel, and then we talk through orbs of influence and how our orb needs to be connected to those that we report to or those that report to us, and the more overlap that we have with that type of activity, the better off our teams actually grow. And then you go out a ring, and then you've got the people who help service you, your vendors, and those people who work with you. You may have a VA or whatever, somebody who's outside that, but you need to bring them in and have them actually be part of your board, if you will. And
Sounds
then
awesome.
yeah, and then you go outside of that and you have your competitors, but trying to figure out how you make your competitors be your collaborators.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I teach, it happens to be Eastern philosophy versus Western pragmatism. Okay, and how do you tie those things together? And it really seems to work well for people, recognizing the wisdom that comes from the past, and then also the newness that comes from innovation, and trying to tie those things together. So that's the synchronize yourself is where the Jack Canfield success principles are. That's a big
Yep.
part of that. But I also have because I've lived all over the world. I've always been impressed, especially by the Filipino workers and my associates that were Filipino, and I've just like been so enthralled. I don't know that I've ever met somebody from the Philippines who wasn't happy and smiling and just doing their nth degree to what they can. And I just got into what's the ethics behind this, what's the ethos that makes them do this, and I found what was called the 7 M's of service, and this is in the travel area, but they learn about empathy and caring and basically building up to excellence and everything. So it's how do you become a servant leader is what that's about. So that's also a component that's in that part. The
So
naturalize part is, did you want to say something, ask something?
I do. There's you just listed off all this rich content, and I want to unpick some of it before
Yeah,
we go
please.
on to even more of it. So just a couple of things to clarify. Innovation ecosystem is one of the big things that you mentioned up front. I'm talking about big picture. You need an innovation ecosystem. There's various components to that. What does that mean, innovation ecosystem?
So just a little bit about my background. For 35 years, I was in technology transfer and licensing. And so I worked at major research universities, national laboratories for governments and different foundations around the world. And basically what happens is that these research is expensive. And so if you take it from the US perspective, hundreds of billions of dollars goes into research every year. And all these organizations, they receive that. Um, And the US government was the first one to do this, but allowed the organizations to actually own the intellectual property, the patents, the copyrights, trade secrets, and things that would come up of these inventions, as long as they did their fiduciary responsibility, which was actually to get it in the hands of somebody who could take it forward. So that's what technology transfer is. And so my job was to help take the different technologies that were in my portfolio and find suitors for that. And sometimes it was existing companies, but a lot of the times it was entrepreneurs who were ready for their next gig and going forward with as a startup.
Okay.
And so the reason why it's called innovation ecosystem is because I'm having to, the technology transfer is just an appendage onto what universities normally do, which is, educate, do research and everything, but it's all an education type tool and everything. So there are people in these universities and these institutions who don't think that technology should be sold, okay? They think it's like adulteration or whatever of the thing, but that's few and far between now. But if you don't sell it, if you don't have it, you put it in the hands of somebody who's going to really take it and move forward, then the technologies actually don't get out there. So
Yeah.
if you look at your cell phone, just to give you some examples, the touch screen, the GPS, a lot of data components in there, all came from technology transfer.
Okay.
So the prime example of what technology transfer is, what people use every day to Google something, that's Google, and that came from Stanford, okay? And it was, that's the most successful one because that became a couple $1 trillion organization and everything. So that's the type of thing. I've dealt with, computer science related stuff, software and other devices and things, but that because I was in software, I've touched every single field. So whether it's biotech, devices for medical stuff, data related to that type of thing, energy, environment, material science. Anyway, I've handled those in different places that I've been,
Okay.
and so it's helped me understand lots of different types of things and how they all tie together or not.
Okay, got it. Understand. So if you're trying to progress something in the business, your innovation ecosystem might have different starting points and definitely interconnections. What I'm curious about next is two things. You're talking about sync yourself, getting alignment. Well, you can clarify what you mean by sync yourself naturally into your environment, whether that's developing empathy and rapport with others or something else, and dealing with the curse of Babel and getting people talking the same language. Can we talk about those two principles?
Sure.
Shed some light, please.
So let's talk about the Curse of Babel first. So if you remember the story of Babel in the Bible, these people were building this tower, trying to get closer to God, but really it was really a way for the leaders to kind of assert power and have control over people. And God didn't like that, so He dispersed everybody. The tower was never completed and everything. And when we think about where we're growing up, whether it's people who are next door to us or even in our own household. So I grew up with 5 siblings and then everybody else in the house over time. And we're all speaking different languages. We're all speaking our own vernacular. So when you get into a company, you've got the C-suite speaking their language, you've got accounting speaking theirs, you've got the factory floor speaking theirs, people in research, human resources and communications. Everybody has their own jargon and their own way of talking about things. And so what I do is I help organizations break through that type of confusion, and we have different activities in regards to how do you get the language alignment. There's a language alignment matrix that I work with. And so basically getting people to understand, common language over those things. And then I help these leaders also understand when they're in a meeting and somebody puts out some jargon that other people don't understand. You pause for a little bit to explain what that means, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and then you go forward. We have our alphabet soup type, discussions that go on all the time because acronyms are pretty big. Well, people need to understand what those acronyms mean, and so that's where the Curse of Babel is broken, and we try to get things, moving forward that way. So
Okay.
the other question was, the syncing. Um, so you need to be able to make sure you're working with those orbs of influence, and those orbs of influence need to be able to understand how to work with each other. And so the consensus building is built on a concept from Japan called Nemawashi. And what this is, you have those bonsai masters. They're clipping the trees and everything. They're tying them up so they keep them, small and everything. And there's a lot of beauty that happens because of that. And a lot of people think that's all there is to it. But actually, these masters, they're actually doing stuff with the roots too. So ne means root, and mawasu means to dig around. So you're providing air and space for the roots to be able to continue to grow and effectuate a stronger plant and everything. And they do work with that. And then when they're going to be ready to transplant that tree, they take soil from the new place where it's going to go to, bring it to the pot or plot, and then they let it ruminate for a while. And then once that's been done for, however long they want to do that, then they'll take that plant to the new pot or plot, and there's less trauma involved. So taking that same concept it's trying to help people understand that people need to be moved into other things. So my idea with the Nemawashi is to have Nemawashi centers, and what this would be is a place um, where the um, a company, you've had a company that's been going for 3 to 4 years, they get bought out by a large company, and during that time, oftentimes the founders they do pretty well, but the other people that are innovative on that team with that startup company, they often don't make out as good as they can for this process. The company that buys them, their stock price spikes, and then 3, 4 years down the road, it actually goes lower than it was originally because they haven't assimilated all these people together. So this is where there needs to be some way of binding that innovative nature of that new team with the bigger group. And a lot of times the bigger group actually has people have antibodies against those people. They don't want to
Sure.
have their places taken and everything. So it actually disrupts things. It creates less value for everybody. And then the people who actually were helping to get that company rolling originally, they're kind of out looking for their new thing, but they feel like they're not being appreciated and everything. So my company's name is Mutual Prosperity, and it's basically, let's have everybody understand how all these pieces of the puzzle fits together, and how do you get the most value out of that for everybody.
So the consensus building principle is basically trying to understand each other's values, practices, approaches, what's
Absolutely.
important to each other.
Yeah.
And so there's an element of understanding humans on a base level. The consensus building, though, is the next step. Is how do you get agreement? Is there some magical pathway for that?
Yeah, that was a great question. So after the Nemawashi, which is just, kind of setting the groundwork, they have a thing called Dingi Show. It's Ringisho, Dingi Show. And Dingi Sado is actually the whole thing. So Dingi is circular, and Sado is system. And so the with this process, you've got a team, a company, and let's say somebody on the factory floor has a question and they have a problem that they're trying to solve. They'll take it to their manager that's here, a middle manager, and they'll say, hey, we think we can solve this by doing these different things. Well, because that manager recognizes, hey, that's really a potentially good solution, they'll go to the manager across the way who has other people these people have to work with, and then they talk through those things, and then ultimately, as they're doing the Nemawashi and they're doing this discussion and they're putting these things in print, Ultimately, they have what's called this dingy show, which is the dingy paper, and that goes up to the shacho, the CEO, and the CEO puts their hanko, which is their stamp on it. And so this is the decision-making process in Japan. And what what a lot of Americans would say like years ago was, oh, it just seems like it would take too long. I just
Mm,
make the decisions. Well,
mm.
top-down decision making doesn't work anymore. Whether it worked before or not, I don't
Yeah.
know. But less, especially now, people want to feel like they're part of the process. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. And this may take a little bit more time to actually get things rolling. But what happens is that once that stamp has been done on that paper, then everybody just goes running and they're all excited and they're bought in and it just flows really, really well. So that's where the consensus building really takes the most effect. And that's what I help leaders understand, that helping people understand where their piece of the puzzle fits and letting them be involved with actually decision making, because the top doesn't necessarily understand all the inner workings of what happens down below. And so if you get a groundswell of everybody being active and doing this, and they get this blessing from on top, it all works together so much better.
It's obvious it's a smart way to scale leadership, and I know that's one of your key principles in helping founders and new organizations move up from one or two people to 50 or more, because things get more complicated the more that you throw bodies in there.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more about the scaling leadership principle and how that relates to autonomous teams.
So since we talked about Nemawashi and the Dingi Seido, the system and the process for making these decisions and everything, basically what you're doing as a leader is that you're actually growing leaders while you're letting people do this type of activity. And I think that growth is really, really important, especially in today's landscape. When you think about the US market, especially, 80%, 87% of the US working force is looking for their next job. That's just an astounding
80%?
statistic. 87%.
87% of people are looking for their next job.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
And why are they doing that? Well, because they don't feel like they're appreciated. They don't feel like they're being taken care of. They feel like if they did something on their own, they could do better. That's what happened during COVID and the Great Reset and everything. The they just the people are just quiet quitting and quick quitting, and there's just a lot of activities in people, always looking for their next job. And I even I have 6 kids, and so I look at them as they've made changes with their jobs, and where it looked like they were in a really good situation before, they weren't happy. And so then ultimately they get into a better situation, and it's just, however those leaders actually treat them and allow them to be treated helps them out. Now, I've had some really good leaders, but I've had some really terrible leaders, as I was going through things. And I've always kept that in mind in regards to how I didn't want to become and how would I make sure that didn't happen. The other thing about my growing up was that I actually started working at 11, and I've had a job ever since then. And I had, probably 20 to 22 different types of jobs. And it wasn't because, people were firing me or whatever. I would just get in situations where somebody needed somebody, and I thought, well, that would be interesting. Let me learn about that. And so I flipped hamburgers at Wendy's, did pizza delivery for Domino's, did painting and cleaning of houses, and a lot of things that were yucky and everything. I did sales for jewelry and clothes and cars, and then managed an educational technology lab when I was in university, and I was a florist too when I was in university. So I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is that each one of those jobs actually helped me walk in other people's shoes. And so I think that if we as leaders can think about how those who report to us or who report to others who report to us, how they feel in their situation, do they actually have the tools they need to do their job the best they can? Do they have the support around them? Is the relationships that are around them, are they supportive, or is there, cantankerous type activity going on? It's those types of things that really need to, help people grow and also feel like they're appreciated. And so if the more of that type of activity takes place on the leadership side, that's much better for the whole team to actually feel like they can buy into the CEO's vision and the mission and ultimately those types of things, that growth mindset. You're growing leaders, and sometimes the leaders will end up leaving, but you should be recognize that that's really important, that they need to be able to grow, to be able to you know want to have other challenges and everything. But if you don't provide those mechanisms for growth and development of your staff, then you'll never get past this innovative layer that you need to actually make your products and services stellar.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really good. So the attitude of growing leaders combined with the Nemawashi principle and the Dingi Seido practices of, some people would say, socialize the concepts or socialize the solution, or basically workshop the solution from the ground up, is a way of building autonomous teams. Like, you're building capability as you go through all of that. Now, big question, John Taylor McEntire, are you ready for the Fast Three?
I am.
Okay. What is the future technology you most want right now?
Well, I'd really like to have advanced renewable energy storage systems.
Yeah.
I think about Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and the things that he produced, which were close to what we would need, but somehow those things disappeared.
Mm.
That's what we need in our world to kind of bring peace to the world, but also, the climate itself. But puts our costs down. I think that we don't need to be doing so much stuff from the ground or whatever. We just need to have better storage systems, and I think
Okay.
that would help. Yeah.
That's a good one. What's your best tip that you ever received for leadership?
So it comes from my dad. And this is like really early on, and he would always tell me, because I was out of school a lot because of the theater, but also our travels and stuff. And he would say, "Don't let your education interfere with your education." And so we need to recognize that everything that we do in life is education, and that's where we will get the most value and understand each other better, and everything. So that's really gone throughout my whole life, and I also put that to say that we can learn something from everything.
I love that as a philosophy. That's lovely. What are you reading or listening to right now, John?
So Less Nice and More You by Dr. Aziz Gazapura. That was a December 2023 book and everything. The last little while, I'm a coach, but I also have coaches myself. And so I've been doing a lot of soul searching and trying to determine, so my life seems to be, probably to others from what we've talked about so far, idealistic, or idyllic. But there's also things that I lived through that I wouldn't want anybody to live through. And so kind of dealing with that childhood trauma has been something that I've had to focus on this last 6 months and everything. And so this book is just one of those ways of doing that. I ended up being, like a people pleaser, a perfectionist, and always wanting to say yes to people. And so I've had to learn that my own resources are, finite, and I've got to be able to utilize those better. And so that's where I've had to get some control over these past issues, and kind of clear through so that I can serve people the way that I need to in a clear-minded way.
Thank you for sharing that, John. It just goes to show that we've all got stuff that we've got to clean up and address. And you never know what's going on for someone. And to have that sort of caring and compassionate mindfulness to each person that shows up in front of you or with you is super important. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for doing the hard work of healing and self-reflection. That's tough going.
I've just learned from uh, different coaches that I was at the University of Illinois and I was there for 10 years and I felt like I was stuck and I thought, I don't feel like I'm supposed to leave, but my wife was going through depression after having had a baby and that pulled me into depression. So I actually kind of understood how people who were depressed felt. My mother had depression when I was growing up and I had to take on a lot of her duties, at a young age to take care of the other siblings. And anyway, what happened at the University of Illinois was that I had a friend who um, had somewhat of a mouth on him, and he would just say what was on the top of his head, and it wouldn't always be kosher. And so he got in a little bit of trouble, and he had to go to a professional coach. So when he would come back from this coaching experience, I every the next day we would be talking for a little while, like an hour or so, and I was just enthralled with the fact of coaching. Now I had coaches when I was in theater, for theater and for music and everything, but I never thought that you'd have a coach for how to become a professional or how to become a better you and everything. But this was really enlightening. I asked my boss, does somebody have to be in trouble to get a coach around here? And they said no. She said no. She says you can have a coach if you want. And she says, well, find one for you. And I said, no, I already know who I want. This is the one that so and so has, and so I was able to go with that person, and for about a year and a half, tremendous changes. And then it was another year later that I actually moved from the University of Illinois up the ladder to the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. But that was a real mind changer for me, and then I recognized the importance of having coaches in your life and having mentors and having people who were of a higher stature than you, sociologically, so that you would have somebody to look forward to becoming like, or mentoring your activities.
I love that. And as a coach myself and somebody who's had coaches for 20 odd years, I wholeheartedly support that. So thank you, John. That was the fast three with extension.
Yes, sorry.
Awesome. John, is there anything that I haven't asked that you'd like to share with the audience before we sign off?
So I think what I would like to share is that I've been married for 37 years, have 6 kids, I've got grandkids and everything. And I think that one of the things that I've recognized, and especially with one of my coaches just recently, um, he was working with my entrepreneurial activities. I'd worked for others for a long time, and he was working with my entrepreneurial activities and had a really rigorous schedule. So 12 hours a day for 7 days a week, for 6 weeks of a boot camp. And I said, well, how do I take care of my wife? And he goes, well, you have 4 hours in the day that are yours, personal. One of those hours is for your wife. And so that was my nautical time. And what was interesting was, even though I was like really extremely busy with this schedule, that 1 hour a day, being able to focus on her, it would usually be, well, it's at 5 o'clock my time. And so I'd be usually helping her while she's cooking. I'd be cleaning, and we'd be doing a lot of things, but that just really helped tie us together better. So I think that as business people, we need to recognize those who are around us, okay, who are supporting us at home, that we need to make sure that we put them in the closest part of our heart, and they need to be part of this. My wife has allowed me to actually work all over the world, and she's the reason why we have our 6 kids, who are successful. We were a team doing this, but without her, we couldn't have done that all. So I just think that we need to recognize those people who are supporting us and give back to them.
Thank you. That's lovely to remember that we are all in this together, and we have partnerships and friendships and special relationships that need nurturing as much as we need to nurture ourselves. John, this has been really fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible background and your fascinating upbringing and all the insights that you bring to the table to helping entrepreneurs scale their businesses and continue to make a difference in that ripple effect way. Thank you so much. On Read to Lead this week, a book on decision making, and it's called Decide. Decide by Brian Whitefield. Subtitle is How to Manage the Risk in Your Decision Making. Now, I've had Brian on the show yonks ago. I'll make sure we put a link to his episode in the show notes. And he has a very particular interest in risk management, and making decisions around risk is an important aspect to consider when we're making decisions, which is why a lot of leaders can turn tyrant, because they feel that if they control the decision, they manage the risk, but nothing could be further from the truth. So that is Decide by Brian Whitefield. That's it for the show this week. Make sure you do sign up and subscribe either in your podcast app by clicking subscribe, or sign up to be a podcast insider. You get additional bonus tip sheets on how to implement the ideas that we discuss on the show. You get the insider's account and special chatty, exciting topics that you can look smart at parties with, such as Did You Know factoids, as well as insider scoops on what's coming next. So we'd love for you to be a podcast insider. The link is in the show notes. Just scroll right down there in your app and you'll find it there. In the meantime, make sure you also sign up for the Power Games Kickstarter First Advance Notice. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you don't have the show notes handy and you're trying to remember, just go to zoerout.com, click on books. Power Games is right there. You can get a preview of some of the content and have a look at the book cover and sign up for what is going to be a very fun Kickstarter campaign coming up in May. In the meantime, live well, lead well. See you next week.